New York City, 1959. A 67-year-old man collapses in his apartment on East End Avenue. His name is Vincent Astor, and when he dies of a heart attack that morning, he takes with him the last direct male heir to ever appear on a list of the richest people in America. He has been married 3 times. He has fathered no children. The name that his great-great-grandfather built into an empire ends, quietly, in a bedroom overlooking the East River. Now go back. Go back 47 years, to a black ocean 400 miles off the coast of Newfoundland, where Vincent's father, John Jacob Astor IV, the richest man on the Titanic, is standing on a tilting deck, watching his pregnant wife disappear into a lifeboat. He believes, wrongly, that the ship cannot sink. He believes, wrongly, that his fortune has purchased him a version of safety that does not exist for other men. How does the richest family in America produce 3 children who inherit an unimaginable fortune and inherit almost nothing else? In the next few minutes, you will learn what happened to a gold pocket watch pulled off a corpse in the North Atlantic. You will learn why a woman named Alice Astor married 4 times and died completely alone in a Manhattan apartment at the age of 54. And you will learn why John Jacob Astor's own youngest son, born 4 months after his father drowned, spent his adult life suing his own family for money he believed was rightfully his. What you are about to hear is not a story about the Titanic. It is a story about what a fortune can buy and what it was never able to buy at all. Keep one detail in your mind as we begin. A watch, recovered from a dead man's jacket, carried in his son's pocket for the rest of that son's life. It will come back. Everything in this story comes back. Before we get to the ocean, we have to go back to where it started. A nursery in a mansion on 5th Avenue, and a boy who was already being taught that love in this family came with conditions attached. William Vincent Astor was born on November 15th, 1891, inside his grandmother's 5th Avenue mansion, at the exact address where the reigning queen of American high society, Caroline Astor, held court over the 400 families she deemed worthy of her ballroom. He arrived 9 months after his parents married, the golden heir to a real estate and hotel fortune that, adjusted into today's money, would rank the family among the wealthiest in the country. But wealth in the Astor household did not translate into warmth. According to accounts from those who knew the family, Vincent's mother, Ava Lowell Willing, found something intolerable in her son's face. He looked like his father. Ava was famous for her beauty and her vanity in equal measure, and biographers have recorded that she would humiliate the boy in public, unable to forgive him for a resemblance he had no control over. His parents' marriage, meanwhile, was already fracturing behind the doors of the mansion. His father, a warden of the Episcopal Church by title, was conducting himself with what one family friend called morals shockingly loose for the position. Here is the detail almost no version of this story mentions. Some of Vincent's own relatives later suggested that his younger sister Alice may not have been his father's biological child at all, that she was conceived during one of Ava's own affairs. Whether or not it was true, the suspicion itself tells you everything about the climate the 2 Astor children were raised in. This was not a household bound by devotion, it was a household bound by appearances. Vincent was sent away to St. George's School in Rhode Island, and from there to Harvard, the traditional finishing school for Astor men who would never actually need to work. He was not close to his father. He was not close to his mother. When his parents' marriage finally collapsed into divorce in 1909, a scandal so significant in an era when divorce was still rare among people of their class, Vincent was 19 years old and already fluent in a lesson that would define the rest of his life. that in this family, love was conditional, but money was constant. 2 years later, his father remarried a teenager only 1 year older than Vincent himself, and within another year, that father would be dead in the Atlantic Ocean, and Vincent, barely 20 years old, still an undergraduate, would become, overnight, one of the richest young men who had ever lived. He was about to learn that money solves almost nothing that actually needs solving. On the night of April 14th, 1912, Colonel John Jacob Astor IV was playing cards in the first-class smoking room of the RMS Titanic when he felt the ship shudder. He went looking for the captain, a man he had dined and joked with only hours earlier, and asked him plainly what had happened. The captain told him to wake his wife. They might need the lifeboats. What followed has been reconstructed from multiple survivor testimonies, and the detail is worth sitting with. Astor woke his pregnant, 18-year-old second wife, Madeline, and told her the damage did not appear serious. For more than 2 hours, he behaved as though the ship's reputation for being unsinkable was a fact rather than an advertisement. He and Madeline sat on the mechanical horses in the ship's gymnasium, still wearing their life jackets, as though this were an inconvenience rather than an emergency. At one point, he sliced open a spare life jacket with a penknife, simply to show his wife what was inside it. By 1:45 in the morning, with the ship now visibly dying beneath them, Astor walked his wife to Lifeboat 4. He asked the officer loading it if he could join her, given her condition. He was refused. Men were not permitted until every woman and child was accounted for. According to fellow passenger Archibald Gracie, who was standing beside him at that exact window, Astor did not argue. He simply asked which lifeboat number it was, so that he might find her again. He was told, "Number 4. Then he stepped back from the railing and, according to several accounts, was later seen calmly smoking a cigarette in the first-class lounge as the ship continued to sink beneath him. He did not know it, but he would never see his wife or his unborn son again. The Titanic went down at 2:20 in the morning. Astor's valet died with him. His dog, an Airedale Terrier the family adored, died with him too. His body was recovered a week later by a cable ship called the Mackay Bennett, identified not by his face, but by the initials sewn into the label of his jacket, JJA. In his pockets, the recovery crew found a gold watch, a diamond ring, $2,440 in American currency, and a small leather pocketbook. That watch is the detail I asked you to remember. Vincent claimed it. He restored it, and for the rest of his own life, he carried his dead father's watch in his pocket, every single day. I told you it would come back. It comes back twice more before this story ends, once in a hospital room and once at an auction house more than a century later. Astor left behind a fortune of $85 million, worth roughly $2.8 billion today, and he left behind 3 children who would spend the rest of their lives finding out that this number could buy them almost anything except the one thing they actually needed from him. Before we go any further, you need to understand one thing about how John Jacob Astor's will was actually written. Vincent, the eldest son, received $69 million of the $85 million estate, the Rhinebeck country house, the yacht, almost everything that mattered. His sister Alice received a $10 million trust. His unborn son by his second marriage, a child he would never meet, received $3 million, to be inherited only once that child turned 21. This was not an equal inheritance. It was a dynastic one, structured the way English aristocratic estates were structured. Nearly everything to the firstborn son, generous, but secondary provisions for everyone else. And it planted, from the very first reading of the will, a resentment between half-siblings who had never even met each other. The unborn son did not yet have a name. He would not exist for another 4 months. But he had already, on paper, been ranked. Vincent, 20 years old, and suddenly one of the richest men alive, dropped out of Harvard and inherited an empire he had almost no training to run. He also inherited something else, the family's reputation. The Astors, for 2 generations, had been slum landlords, quietly collecting rent from some of the worst tenement housing in New York, while living inside marble mansions. Vincent seems to have understood, with unusual clarity for a man his age and class, that this reputation was a liability. He began selling off the family's tenement holdings and reinvesting in New York City's first managed public housing projects. He would go on to fund children's playgrounds in the Bronx and in Harlem. He eventually bought and ran Newsweek magazine for over 20 years. Here is the detail that separates Vincent from almost every other heir in his social circle. He actually worked. Biographer Francis Kiernan described him going to the office every single day and then retreating home at night to sit by the fire, largely alone, while his successive wives went out to the parties he had lost interest in. Because that's the second thing the inheritance bought him, an inability to stay married. His first wife made him swear off children after a case of mumps left him sterile at his own wedding. His second marriage lasted roughly a decade before it too dissolved. He would not find something resembling stability until his third marriage, in 1953, to a woman named Brooke Russell, a marriage that was, according to society gossip at the time, arranged by his own second wife as a condition of granting him a divorce. Vincent had become, by his own late 50s, exactly what he'd spent his whole adult life trying to escape. An Astor who had everything except the people who were supposed to matter most. And 2 states away, his half-siblings were discovering the very same thing, in very different ways. Ava Alice Muriel Astor, known simply as Alice, was 7 years old when her parents divorced and 10 years old when her father drowned. She grew up mostly in England with her mother, a woman who had been given a $10 million divorce settlement and a title, Lady Ribblesdale, after remarrying an English baron. Alice inherited her father's $10 million trust, and with it, entry into a world of European aristocracy that would define, and in many ways consume, the rest of her life. In 1924, at the age of 21, Alice married Prince Serge Obolensky, a Russian aristocrat more than a decade her senior, who had fled the Bolshevik Revolution with a title and very little else. The wedding, held across 3 separate ceremonies in London, was described as the social event of the English season. Her brother Vincent gave her a stone house on his own Hudson Valley estate, which she named Marianrue, a place of Mary's rest. It did not last. Alice divorced Obolensky in 1932 and, within months, married an Austrian writer named Raimund von Hofmannsthal in a quiet civil ceremony in a Newark courthouse, a striking contrast to the aristocratic spectacle of her first wedding. That marriage produced a daughter and ended within 6 years. Here is where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. From 1936 to 1937, Alice pursued a passionate affair with the British choreographer Frederick Ashton, a man who, by every account, was gay and had no romantic future to offer her. When that affair ended, Alice did something that biographers have puzzled over for decades. She married 2 more times, and both of her remaining husbands, journalist Philip Harding and architect David Playdell Bouverie, were also, according to multiple accounts, gay men. 4 marriages, 4 divorces, and a pattern that looks less like romantic misfortune and more like a woman repeatedly choosing men who could never actually be present with her. perhaps because presence itself, after a childhood defined by a father's absence and a mother's coldness, was not something Alice Astor knew how to receive. She raised 4 children across those marriages, kept a home in the Hudson Valley her brother had given her, and became a respected patron of ballet companies in both London and New York. But on July 19, 1956, at 54 years old, Alice Astor died alone of a stroke in her apartment on East 61st Street in Manhattan. Here is the suppressed detail few tellings of this story include. The will she left behind had gone missing. What was admitted to a Manhattan surrogate court that November was not her signed original, but an unsigned copy, witnessed as accurate by her own lawyer, since the real document could never be located. Her $5 million estate, divided among her 4 children, was settled on the strength of a lost document and a lawyer's word. She kept her promise to her children. She never found one to herself. 4 months after the Titanic sank, on August 14, 1912, Madeline Astor gave birth to a boy at the family's Fifth Avenue mansion. She named him John Jacob Astor VI, after the father he would never know existed. The press, sensing a story that would sell for decades, gave him a nickname that would follow him to his grave, the Titanic Baby. His mother, 19 years old, and suddenly a widow, was permitted to keep the income from a $5 million trust and the use of 2 mansions, on the strict condition that she never remarried. She remarried anyway, twice, first to a banker, later to an Italian boxer named Enzo Fiermonte, a union her own son fought bitterly to prevent. When a reporter asked young Astor whether his mother was really marrying a professional boxer, his answer was 2 words. Unfortunately, it's true. Jakey, as the family called him, inherited his $3 million trust, the smallest of the 3 children's shares, on his 21st birthday. By then, it had grown to roughly $5 million, a fortune by any ordinary measure, but a fraction of what his half-brother Vincent controlled. And Jakey never stopped noticing the gap. He married 4 times. His first wife, Ellen, Tucky French, had reportedly pursued him while he was still engaged to one of her own close friends. She was even scheduled to serve as a bridesmaid at that original wedding before becoming the bride herself. That marriage produced 1 son and ended in divorce after 9 years. His second marriage, to Gertrude Gretsch, produced a daughter and also ended in divorce. A Mexican divorce, initially ruled invalid, forcing the couple through the process a second time in American courts. His third marriage lasted only weeks. His fourth marriage lasted until his wife's death in 1985. But the defining relationship of Jakey's adult life was not with any of his 4 wives. It was with his half-brother Vincent, a man he had grown up estranged from and who, by most accounts, never accepted Jakey as a full member of the family, reportedly doubting he was even biologically an Astor at all. When Vincent died in 1959, childless, leaving his entire fortune to his third wife Brooke, rather than to any blood relative, Jakey did something his father's will had essentially trained him to do from birth. He sued. Jakey argued that Vincent had been mentally incompetent when he signed his final will just months before his death, pointing to his half-brother's heavy drinking and declining health, and he accused Brooke Astor of bringing Vincent liquor in the hospital specifically to keep him compliant while the paperwork was finalized. He said publicly that Vincent had the legal right to keep all the money, but not the moral one. The case never reached a jury. Jakey settled for $250,000, a number that, set against the Astor fortune, functioned less like compensation and more like a closing statement on a lifetime of feeling like the family's afterthought. He died in Miami Beach in 1992, at 79 years old, and was brought home to New York to be buried beside the parents whose marriage had made him famous before he could even speak. Here is what an $85 million fortune actually purchased, tallied out across one generation. Vincent Astor, 3 marriages, no children, dead at 67 of a heart attack, his entire estate left not to any blood relative, but to a wife of only 6 years. Alice Astor, 4 marriages, 4 divorces, an affair with a man who could never love her back, dead alone at 54, her final will a lost document, reconstructed from a lawyer's memory. John Jacob Astor VI, 4 marriages, a lifelong feud with his own half-brother, a lawsuit against his brother's widow that ended not in vindication, but in a settlement check. Dead at 79, having spent decades defined by a nickname he never chose, the Titanic Baby, for a disaster he experienced only from inside his mother's womb. None of Colonel Astor's 3 children died in poverty. That was never the danger money like this creates. The danger it creates is subtler. It removes almost every ordinary obstacle from a person's life, except the ones that actually determine whether that life feels worth living, whether you were loved without conditions, whether you trusted the people closest to you, whether your name meant something to you beyond what it was worth on paper. And there is one more entry in this accounting, because the Astor story does not actually stop with these 3 children. Vincent's 3rd wife, Brooke Astor, went on to become one of the most celebrated philanthropists in New York history, giving away hundreds of millions of dollars over the following 4 decades. But near the end of her own life, her only son, Anthony Marshall, was convicted of exploiting his elderly, dementia-afflicted mother, illegally altering her will to redirect tens of millions of dollars to himself. A judge sent him to prison. The case became one of the most notorious elder abuse scandals in American legal history, playing out, almost a century later, the exact same battle over the exact same fortune, fought by people the Colonel never lived long enough to meet. The money never stopped moving. It just kept finding new people to damage on its way through the family tree. Remember the watch, pulled from a dead man's jacket in the freezing Atlantic in 1912, carried every day for the rest of his life by a son who inherited an empire and never learned how to be loved inside it. Passed down as a christening gift in 1935 to the infant son of the Colonel's own executive secretary, as though even Vincent understood, on some level, that the watch belonged in a family that might actually know what to do with it. And finally, in April of 2024, sold at auction in London for $1.5 million to an anonymous buyer, the last physical object connected to Colonel Astor's body, purchased by a stranger who never knew any of these people at all. That is the answer to the question I asked you at the beginning. How does the richest family in America produce 3 children who inherit everything and are given almost nothing? It happens exactly the way it happened here. Quietly, legally, generation after generation, inside houses far too large for the amount of warmth that was ever inside them. Vincent Astor spent his fortune trying to prove he was not his ancestors, the slum landlords, the misers, the men who mistook rent checks for legacy. Alice Astor spent hers looking for a version of intimacy that kept slipping through her fingers. Jakey Astor spent his simply trying to be counted as a full member of a family that had ranked him on paper before he was even born. None of them got what they were actually looking for. The Titanic did not sink the Astor family. It only revealed, in one brutal night, exactly how little the family's fortune had ever been protecting them from. The watch still exists somewhere today, ticking in a private collection, in the pocket of someone who has no idea what it cost.